spring. Yeah, always happy to be back at Bookstore One, hands down the most beautiful bookstore here in Sarasota, and I think we decided earlier, this side of the Mississippi. So, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I have just a couple of housekeeping things and a few thanks to give. Let's take a moment to silence our cell phones. I'm going to join you in doing that, and I say cell phones because I unfortunately am covering two at the moment, so we'll make sure these are all silent so we are here with the artists. Some thank yous. I want to say thanks to the Charles and Marjorie Barancik Foundation for their seasonal support of these programs, as well as the Gulf Coast Community Foundation, and a big thanks in particular to Robin and Chuck Citron for their sponsorship of Kimberly's residency. If you want to learn more about that, you can talk to Amy or Travis, who you saw on your way in. A huge thanks to our trustees, some of whom I see in the audience. Thanks. Thanks for your leadership and guidance. You have Kimberly's full bio, but I'm just gonna do a little bit of name dropping here. Kimberly King Parsons is the author of the novel We Were the Universe, which we'll be talking a little bit about this evening, as well as the short story collection Blacklight, which was longlisted for the National Book Award and the Story Prize. In addition to being a fellow at the Hermitage, she has also been a fellow at Yaddo and Columbia University. And she won the 2020 National Magazine Award for Foxes, a story published in the Paris Review. You've got her full bio here. I encourage you to check it out, but for now, I'm gonna move out of the way and hand the microphone to the fantastic Kimberly King Parsons.
This is the side of the bed that I sleep on, so I'll sit here. Hi. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to start by just thanking the Hermitage. This has been such a lovely week. I've been here with my family, which this is very unusual for residencies to allow you to bring your family, and I love it. So thank you, James, and everyone at the Hermitage. And thank you, Bren. This is a gorgeous bookstore. I love it. Beautiful. So I'm just going to read like a tight 7-minute reading, and then James and I are going to have a conversation. This book is called We Were the Universe, and it came out May 14th. It has a lot of adult themes, and I've chosen something tonight that is PG-13. The Times called it relentlessly horny, so just so you know, that's part of it, but the part we're going to read tonight is tame. And so for years, whenever people would ask me, what is this book that you're writing about, I would say it's about Texas, motherhood, and psychedelics. And all of those things are true. It's also about the transcendent connection between sisters, and the way that the choices in our past animate our present. And so all you need to know for this selection is that our main character, Kit, is on a little vacation with her friend Pete. He's just been dumped by his boyfriend, and she is still reeling from the loss of her sister Julie, which takes place 3 years before the story begins. And she has left her daughter Gilda at home with her husband Jad, and they are in Montana on a little weekend getaway together. I think the rest will be pretty self-explanatory. Okay. I seek out leaders. People like my friend, yes, Pete, and like my husband. People who will choose the restaurant, the movie, be my tour guide. I let myself be pulled. It makes things so much easier. Not having an opinion is a form of control, my husband says, and he's not wrong. Pete puts down his canteen and grabs my wrist. He points to a hill in the distance, and it takes me a while to notice a staggered mass of bighorn sheep climbing up the side. He stares in awed silence at first, then quickly loses his mind. Take my picture, Jesus, he hisses, shoving his phone at me. Oh my God. The animals don't mind. I take shot after shot. Pete with his hands on his hips, eyes bright. Pete with a sexy finger in his mouth, face tilted down. Like the moon or mountains, sheep underwhelm in photos. I'd never considered the creatures I might see in a state I hadn't intended to visit, out here big and free. Sometimes at night, I think about whales loose in the ocean, living their lives, and it upsets me. Pete informs me that the sheep are eating clover and sedges, willow and sage. He says they can contract pneumonia from us and die, that it's a real problem in the sheep community. What the heck is a sedge, I say. Pete could tell me any sheep thing and I'd believe it. I'm completely at his mercy. Bizarre as it is, the sight of a fluffy lamb on wobbly legs triggers my letdown. I grab my tits and Pete laughs as my place in the animal kingdom rushes in. I'll be quick, I say. I squat and take my breast pump kit out of my backpack, the nozzles and flanges, the tubes and the reservoir, the special brush I use to clean the parts. I can put this thing together in the dark. I've never owned a gun, but I get it. The feeling of pieces fitting precisely, a series of successful clicks and turns, holding a well-crafted thing in one hand. I'm sorry I have to do this out here, I say. I'm totally engorged. Is this gross for you? He says, oh, relax, I don't mind. He swipes at images on his phone, dicks or animals, maybe some of each. Sometimes Gilda will walk up to me and shove her head under my shirt. Quick squirt, she'll say. It's manipulation, my friend told me when I confessed this. Isn't she too young to manipulate, I said. The thing that kills me about my phone calls with Yes is how silent her kids are in the background, all three of them. Meanwhile, Gilda will be throwing herself around the living room like a demon, shouting, help me, Mom, Mom, why won't you help? Yes has taught her kids to walk up to her and calmly place their hand on her arm. They wait to be regarded, she explains. Then, and only then, they politely ask for what they need. On my end, Gilda will be screaming, wailing on the carpet, can't do it, can't do a cartwheel or any kind of wheel. Yes insists manipulation is like swallowing, something ingrained in even the youngest of our species. Gilda will be 4 soon, an age that is my supposed cutoff for nursing. It's Yes's hardline anyway. I'm not quite sure what other mothers might think. Soon enough, I'll have to stop nursing or start lying. I balance this anxiety by hanging out with Pete, who doesn't know or care what's normal. Motherhood itself is abnormal to Pete, which takes the pressure off. When I tell Pete about the endearing things Gilda does, he nods politely and glazes over. Maybe when she's older, they can talk about animals together. We live on this planet with a ridiculous goddamn number of them. Joke animals like the blobfish and the duck-billed platypus. What are they for? Right now on a savanna, there is a giraffe wrapping its black tongue around the highest leaf. Why? It's psychedelic, this world. Kids will remind you. You get to a certain age and you don't think about the micro kangaroo traveling pouch-bound along its mom's hairy body. You don't think about marsupials at all. Who has time for wombats when you're trying to get laid or pay a parking ticket or get to work? Gilda keeps one of our bathroom drawers filled with acorns. Nut space, she calls it. You get used to it. A drawer full of 100 acorns that shift and spin and rattle every time you open it. There's no reason to even open that drawer anymore because the only thing in it is acorns, you should know by now. But you remember the former drawer, when it had floss or hair ties or some useful thing. You remember your childless former life, or your body does. It's a reflex, how your hand goes out to open it, a drawer that was once of use. The body is stupid every day. It doesn't know until it's too late. Acorns. Where's the floss? I'll ask my husband, and he'll say, under the nuts. My nature, Gilda screamed the one time we tried to throw them out. But I love that part most of all, the weird wildness she brings to our house. Dinosaurs are very important in our daily lives. I've missed so much new information. The dinosaurs I learned about as a child, they've been updated. That one they taught us had 2 brains, for example, that one is called something else now, and the 2 brains are a myth. It's all been changed. Certain things are so loaded in youth, forgotten about later. Dinosaurs and planets and quicksand in your childhood, hay rides and hand jobs in your adolescence. I used to spend a lot of time contemplating the Bermuda Triangle and the Loch Ness Monster, the big mysteries of the universe. Why don't they just fly into the triangle and test it, I wondered. Why don't they drain the loch? It's not because we don't have the technology. It's because once you grow up, no one has the curiosity or wherewithal to spend time contemplating those things. You're like, there's a lot we don't know. Pete bought cigarettes at the airport and he lights one now. I love it, how he waves it around like we're in a bar, pristine nature as our backdrop. The smoker is old Pete. This health-conscious sheep lover is some different person. He coughs and hacks, his clean, well-adjusted lungs screaming. He beats on his chest, tight and fit from Pilates. Pumping gives me instant relief, though I don't empty myself. It'll take too long. I get a few pulls out and the tingling stops. Pete turns to the sun to give me a little privacy. I dump the collected milk in the dirt, something I wouldn't have dreamed of doing a few years ago, back when every drop seemed like liquid gold. The bighorn sheep are still there glancing at us, hopping staggered up the mountainside, but Pete seems less impressed now. I love the word engorged, he says. And I'll stop there. Thank you. And James is going to
Yeah.
talk.
What a pleasure. Amazing. Thank you
so much. Ooh, this one's loud. That was incredible. Thank you for sharing. I think we'll go back a little ways, and I'm curious. In the arc of creating for you, this comes after Blacklight, a short story collection. Were these things sort of coming together at the same time, or was it get Blacklight out the door and then spend some time working on the novel? And are those processes different based on the sort of different structure of the books?
Yeah, great question. So I signed a 2-book deal, but the second book did not exist at all. And so my editor was like, hey, so we want to buy the short stories, but do you have a novel in the works? And I totally didn't. But my agent was like, no, we say that you do. And so we said that, and she had faith that I could somehow figure out how to write a novel. She had more faith than I did at the start. And so I didn't have an idea for a novel at all. I just knew my wheelhouse. So when we signed the contract, it was like, what do you want to write about? And so that's when I said, oh, Texas, motherhood, and psychedelics. Like, those are my areas of expertise. So those are the things that I literally put in the contract. And then when it came time to write, that was it. It just said, work 2 shall be about Texas, motherhood, and psychedelics. And so when it came time to write this, it was a pandemic. And because I lied and told them I had started working on it years before, and I was 2 years late. But I feel like if you're gonna be 2 years late with a book, the pandemic is a pretty good excuse. I kept thinking that people from, like, my publisher was gonna come break my kneecaps, and they don't even care. They just keep amending the contract. So it was late, but I had to go back and think of, well, have I written a character who I feel like has a voice that I could ride for a long-term project? And so I had started something that didn't make it into Blacklight because geographically it was wrong, because all the stories in Blacklight are set in Texas, which is where I was born and raised. And this was a weird little Montana story. And so we had pulled it out of the collection. But then when I had to come up with this, I was like, maybe I'll just start with Kit and see if it will work. And as far as the process for writing the difference between short stories and a novel, I kind of think of it like a short story to me feels like you're looking through a keyhole at a perfectly composed room, but you're not necessarily even being asked to enter the room. You're just looking. And a novel for me is like being invited into someone's house, and you're like opening drawers and cabinets and looking under the rug and walking down hallways, and you're given a full tour of something. And for years I really thought this short story was kind of the superior form. And then I wrote a novel, and now I'm like, I don't know, this is pretty fun. Yeah.
And once you knew you had to write a novel because you
Yes.
signed a contract,
Yeah.
Did it sort of flow quickly, or was it a struggle at all?
No, I mean, the way that I write is I use this method called consecution, which you can read about on the internet, which is this idea that the first sentence of anything contains the sort of genetic material for everything that follows. So what you're doing is I'm not outlining, I don't have any ideas when I start something. For me, having an idea is actually the death of the project. If I have an idea, I'm definitely on the wrong path. So I like to be completely stupid for years, really, until I figure out who's talking to me, and then I can start to figure out other details based on that. So it's just looking at the sentence that you just wrote and pulling out anything that might be profitable to use in the next sentence. And so it's going like this, and that's just what you do. So for many years, there's no sense of an arc or a shape of a story, but it's really like this sort of blissful ignorance of just work every day, until eventually it starts to take shape. And then you take these chunks of information that are now sort of locked into place, and you move them around and play with them. And I look for things like portals, which are just doors that maybe I opened that I didn't step through all the way, and mirrors, like things that need to be repeated in another place or that could be viewed differently. Yeah.
Do you teach?
I do. Yeah.
I wish I was writing this down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, and I'll go here because we already sort of talking about sort of the business of this stuff.
Sure.
I want to ask about the title.
Sure.
And I have the insider knowledge that it wasn't always this
No.
title. Can you talk a little bit about how titles come to you, or how titles are given to you, or how does that work?
Yeah, so originally this book was called The Boiling River, which is the place in Montana that they visit, which is a real place that unfortunately because of flooding in 2022, you can't access it anymore. That's how long it took me to write this book, so that the whole place has been wiped out. But it was called The Boiling River for the whole time I was writing it, and then sort of late in the game, my editor said, "Can we have a conversation about your book?" And I was like, "Oh no, this sounds terrible." And they said, "You know, we are worried that readers might think it's about climate change or that it's much more about nature." Kit is she talks about being bird deaf and plant blind. Like she's not in tune with nature at all. And so we thought the river people might be sad to buy a book called The Boiling River and realize that there's like 20 pages of river, and then she's back in her chemical memory. So they said, what if instead we call it something that had to do with the band she was in when she was in high school, and the band was called You Are the Universe, which is actually a band I was in high school, a really bad band. And so, but then You Are the Universe is a stolen title. You probably have heard of it. It's like, yeah. So we couldn't use that. So then my agent thought, what about We Were the Universe, which also captures that longing between Kit and her sister Julie, who has died. So and they thought that maybe that would capture some of the like psychedelic, more like, I don't know, it's like a sexier title than the Boiling River, which now feels like the boring river, honestly. At this point, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. So
and I'm just curious, does that feel like an engaging collaboration, or does that feel like somebody's like telling you what your story is?
No, I mean, I think it's just the thing that's so great about the right agent and the right editor is that they are telling you the story that you're already trying to tell. They can see the thing that's a few drafts down the road, so they're actually telling you what you're doing, because sometimes when you're doing it, you don't know what you're doing. And so they were like, we really want to get that sort of glittery, shimmery longing, and like this title. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's much better. But I think I imagined a book called The Boiling River with like a woman sitting by a dark river and like a very quiet book. And then when I see this cover, which I absolutely love, I have it tattooed on my arm. Like that's how much I love it. It looks almost like, it's like sort of, it's almost like very young, and it looks like a band flyer, and I don't know. I'm surprised that this is the way that it turned out, but it really does feel like the book of my heart. I just didn't know what my heart was at that time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Of course. Do you want to talk about what the image is of the stars?
Oh yeah. So this is Janet Hansen is the cover designer, but she took these star girls. They're from a Spanish cartoon, which are just these little star girls that run around causing mischief, and I don't really know what they're saying in the cartoon, but I watched some of it online. And I love them because in the band it's Julie, Kit, and Yes, and they are really just sort of in service of Julie, who's the only one with any talent. But that's, yeah, I love the sort of whimsy of this cover, especially because it is ultimately a book about grief, but it's still a light book about grief. So
it's quite funny.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
For being a book about grief,
It's
quite good.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I feel like we often think about novelists in particular as sort of like the artist out there alone, like drafting and redrafting and writing these words. But the way you talk about it, it sounds relatively collaborative, like other people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you get a bunch of really smart people around you to help you to show you what you're already trying to do. And my agent's amazing, but also I have a bunch of friends who we get together and leave voice memos for each other and talk to each other about the work. And there's no sense of like competition. It's just about like helping each other to have our most authentic voice. And it's really great to see all my friends. I've been in a writing group since 2009 when I lived in New York. And then when I moved away, I thought, oh no, it was going to end. And we've just continued on Zoom every month. And there's a lot of people involved actually, whether it's people reading it or that you're just talking about things, concepts with, but it definitely doesn't feel like a solitary venture. I'm one of those like extroverted writers, a weird one. So for me, the hard part is being alone in a room for 5 years. That's much harder than the other parts.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about music also. Obviously, you mentioned that they're in a band. That's sort of a part of the plot. You've got a quote of Montreal at the top of the book. So, how did music sort of shape the creation of this world?
Yeah, so music has always been really important to me. I sing, and our goal growing up in Dallas, Texas in high school was to be good enough that we could open for actual good bands. And so all we wanted to do was open for anyone who would come through town, and sometimes we would open for the opener because that's how bad we were. But I always loved this idea of, I didn't grow up in a house with a lot of books. Like we had 3 books actually in the house. I can tell you what they were. One was the Bible, one was the A volume of the encyclopedia because it was free and they would give it to you to try to entice you to buy the rest. And one was this sci-fi book with a very sexy lady on the cover that I was sort of obsessed with. But those were the 3 books in our house. But my dad played a lot of music, and so I grew up listening to Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan. So I always had this sort of acoustics, the sound of words in my head. And so certainly the way that I write is really reliant on sound and the friction between words. And then I always like it when the subject matter of the book sort of mirrors the process of the writing of the book. And so these characters, especially Julie, is hyper attuned to sound and voice. And so definitely it played a role. And they're so interested in these bands, and you know that feeling when you're a teenager into a band, like there's nothing like it. And so I really wanted to capture that sort of sense of obsession.
Do you listen to music while you work?
No, not at all. No, total silence. I listen to music all the time in my life, but when I'm working, I do this thing where I put in earplugs and then I have headphones, and then I even will chew gum so I can hear my weird mouth sounds. I don't know, it's a whole thing. I just like to be, I have children and they're noisy and loud, so I have to separate that. But I think any song, if I hear it, it will pull me out. I listen actively, so it's hard for me. I have to have total silence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do projects, maybe when they're done, do they have like a playlist in your head?
Yeah, for sure.
What are some songs that are on this playlist?
Yeah, so okay, in this, it's interesting because obviously I like to just insert the things that I love into these characters. So it's not just, it's like a lot of glitter rock, a lot of David Bowie and T-Rex and that stuff, but then also like there's a lot of indie rock or like folk singers like Smog, Bill Callahan, like just songs that I love. I just find ways to sort of insert them, but I never like to name the song that I'm inserting, so that if you're the reader, you know this band and you know what she's talking about of Montreal, who's yelling like, "Come on, Chemicals!" Like you would know if you're a fan what that song is, but if you're not missing anything, and you can just insert your own musical preferences into those places. But I love the idea also of, they're always in bars and there's always like some young country song or some song that she's like, this isn't a song, this is a product. Like she's like judgy about things that she hears. But I just, music is sort of, I have like 2 different soundtracks for this actually. The literal soundtrack, which is every song that comes up in the book, and then this sort of like vibey soundtrack, which is just the songs that I think encapsulate the vibe of the book, yeah.
I would love to listen to that.
It's
Get
on
Spotify. Oh, it is? Okay, great.
Yeah,
I'll look for it.
Knopf actually made a little cute little logo and put it in Spotify. So if you like go to the Knopf Spotify page, you can listen to it.
I will definitely check that
Yeah.
out. Very cool. All right, I'm going to be selfish for just 1 or 2 more, and then I'll open it up, I promise. But I'm from Texas, so I just wanted to ask about growing up there, sort of formative years there, and then going off into the world. How do you think about Texas these days?
Yeah, so I was born in Lubbock, Texas, but grew up in Kitty, Texas, which is even smaller than Lubbock, Texas, and then I went to Dallas for high school and my undergraduate degree and a master's degree. I like how I just forgot about that other master's degree. It's just before. But I love these places because there's always been this musical connection actually with that as well. So Turkey, Texas, which is next to Kitty, Texas, which is where my grandparents are from, is the home of Bob Wills, who's the father of Western Swing. And then, of course, Buddy Holly is from Lubbock, Texas. And the book is set partially in Wink, Texas, which is where Roy Orbison is from. So there's like this interesting marriage of these really meaningful musicians from these very tiny towns who all really wanted to get the hell out of those towns as soon as they could. And I definitely spent, as a child, I always had this sensation of wanting to be elsewhere, even though I didn't know what that was or where it would be. But so I spent a lot of time sort of clawing my way out of Texas, only to like never shut up about Texas. Like it's all I write about. I'm constantly like returning there in my mind. It has my, formative core memories took place there. Some of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen in my life are there. So I think of it really fondly. And I have a bunch of brothers and sisters, and all my family is still there. Nobody left. I went to graduate school in New York and never came back. So I'm there all the time because my kids, grandparents. But but yeah, I don't think I could have written about it while I was growing up there, but it's certainly a place that is full of nostalgia. Yeah.
Maybe this is because I have a young child of my own, but when I was reading the book, I was so struck by Gilda's dialogue, just the way she forms thoughts and ideas, and how simultaneously like hilarious or cutting or really poetic and beautiful that dialogue is. Do I have that to look forward to? Are my kids going to talk like that?
Yes.
Or like...
Everything Gilda says, like quick squirt. My younger son said, "Can I get a quick squirt?" Like he would say that to me. Like one kid called breast milk good, and one called it milky, and so good made it in because it's better than milky. If you're workshopping the things your kids say to you, but I totally steal things from their mouths and put them in the book. And kids really are very trippy. Like the way that they view the world is very strange. Things that are normal to us, kids are fascinated with in different ways. An example I always give is my son Lev was obsessed with the concept of blood banks. He's like, "You mean there's a whole building full of blood?" Yeah, that's what it is. But just these things that we accept as normal, they find so shimmery and beautiful, and so it really sort of remakes the whole world. But yeah, absolutely, your kids say they say the best stuff, the strangest stuff, and what you have to do is on your phone, you keep a little note and you just title it "Things My Kids Say," and then you steal from them.
Brilliant. And do they read your stuff? Do they like your stuff? Do they know that mom is a writer? Like, what is their relationship to your work?
They're learning, and actually one of the great things, I mentioned earlier, being able to bring my family here to Hermitage. I love the idea of my work being something that I can bring my family into instead of having to leave my family to do the work. And so they're starting to get a sense of that, and because of opportunities like this, honestly. And they have been in the audience for things. They were sort of like, why would so many people want to come hear you read from a book? Like, but then my younger son, after my launch night, he said, "That wasn't as boring as it could have been."
That's a pretty good impersonation too.
Yeah.
You must spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
Well, I have a whole list of questions and lots of other things that I want to talk about, but I want to make sure that I'm not entirely selfish. So I'm curious what else you're wondering about, either about We Were the Universe or Blacklight or what else? Yeah, Bryn.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the short story Foxes and the writing of that story?
Yeah, so Foxes, writing short fiction actually, I think because I didn't have a book contract, which I guess actually did sort of light a fire under me and I got faster, but it took me so long to write the stories in Blacklight. And I started that story Foxes in 2005, and Blacklight came out in 2019, so not a quick process, but for a long time I wrote that story without having a child's voice in it. If you've read it, there's like, it alternates between, it's a mother, a sort of troubled mother, who's, the father has just left, and the daughter is telling these really violent stories. And for a long time, I just wrote the mother's part, and we didn't hear from the daughter at all. And I just think I didn't know how to write kids, really. And then my son was born in 2011, so started 2005, worked on it a little bit, put it in a drawer for many years. And then when I figured out sort of the cadence and rhythms and the things that kids say, and again, things like my other son is like, believes there's a woman made of garbage who lives in our walls. Anyway, just these weird, like very sort of morbid, like dark things that they would say. I wanted to sort of put that weird darkness into that story. And so when they were old enough to start saying weird things to me, I was able to figure out how to write the child's voice, and that everything sort of clicked into place at that point, which was, I think I finished that story like right before it was due to my editor. So like, I worked on it from 2005 to 2017 or something crazy like that. Not constantly, but so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a question.
Sure.
I love the ending of We Were the Universe.
Oh, thank you.
And when I read it, I thought, I had the question, I didn't feel that coming.
Yeah.
Did you, while you were writing it? Did you know where you were going, or did it just occur to you like it kind of does in the book?
So I felt really lucky to have figured out the ending about halfway through the process of writing the book, which was for me really important because there were so many months where I was like, you're writing this work and you're like, what am I even doing? Like, where is it going? But to know that I was writing towards that ending the book is shaped like a fractal. There's the center, which is the Boiling River event, them in the river, and then there's this this trip, San Pedro trip that she and her sister take when they're in high school. And those two scenes were the first scenes I wrote of the book, and I knew that I would have to revisit that core of the story at the end. And so even though I started there, and then I sort of started manipulating the present, playing with all of this stuff with Gilda and her present life. I knew about the past long before I knew about the present. But I did have that idea for that switch at the end. And it's interesting because you can always tell who's finished the book because everyone's like, what happened? That's so bizarre. Or like the end is like it's like a twist. It's like a literary fiction twist, which isn't really much of a twist, but it's a perspective shift. And yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question before I throw some more out? Cool. I want to ask about, and you've touched on this a little bit. It was one of the 3 words that you knew the book was going to be about.
Yeah.
Substance shows up in the book, and like relationship to it, addiction, or but it strikes me as it's never really demonized, which I think it can be in a lot of the sort of contemporary news and things like that. So, but nor is it glorified, right? Nor is it like this is the path to your salvation.
Sure.
Can you talk about like sort of striking that balance and what that was like to write?
Yeah, well, so in the story, Kit, our narrator, talks about experimenting with different drugs and how nothing ever really like took hold of her. Nothing. She was able to pick things up and put them down, and she was fine. And her sister had a different relationship with drugs, and so this is always the danger of experimenting with something. And for Kit, she was a sort of psychedelic evangelist. It changed her life in all these positive ways, and so she looks at it as this like this really bright spot in her past. Knowing all the while that that's not for everyone, as anyone will tell you. Like, psychedelics aren't necessarily like the best thing for all people. But I definitely wanted to tap into this idea of being open to the possibility of a transcendent connection between human beings, which is very like hippie. I know it's like hippie shit a little bit to be like we're all the same fibers, man, or whatever. But I do really believe, and I have had, this will not surprise anyone who's read the book, some positive formative experiences personally myself, that I felt really shaped the way that I view the world, but also the way that I view art and art making and the way that the pieces of things fit together and music. And I feel like my life has been really enriched by it. Even when the experience was negative, I felt like that was you have the trip you're meant to have, So, so there's that sort of presenting that, and then also showing that this is a way, these sisters are connected in a way that goes beyond drug use, because there's a moment in the past where they sort of have a shared hallucination when they're totally sober. But I like the way that drugs can sort of lift the scrim, rather quickly. And I've always been fascinated about drug writing, dream writing, sex writing, all of these extreme moments that are just outside of the everyday experience. That's what I'm always trying to get to, is like what's above or below the everyday experience.
Well, and it feels like it is a thing that is in the sort of zeitgeist at the moment, from everything from like How to Change Your Mind on Netflix to
Totally.
the opioid crisis, right? Like it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a nuanced and interesting perspective on all that stuff. And it leads me to another question, is you have a lot of sort of body-mind relationship moments, right? There's a couple of times in the book where the body knows something or forgets something, even in the section you read. I think there was a section. So could you talk a little bit about that?
So this book is really deeply embedded in Kit's interiority, and she's getting jerked backwards into the past all the time because the world has become dangerous, because grief sort of makes you a time traveler, and all these things remind you of the past. And so I knew that since it was such an interior book, I didn't want to write a vapor book. I wanted to write a meat book. And so I was like, how do I get the meat back in the book? And so the way I find to do that is to keep the physical body on the page as much as possible. And so it's also a way for her, she's trying to find grounding in her her memories in her mind, and one of the quick fixes for her is fantasy. So she has all these like very detailed sexual fantasies about the men and women of her neighborhood, and these are quick fixes when she starts to feel pain, essentially, because it's, well, I'm going to just, pleasure is this quick antidote to pain, so that's what she's doing. But so when you're in someone's head so much, I feel like you have to always bring things back to the body, which is, I also think, a very mammalian thing to do. Like when we're grieving, or this idea too that Kit is in her head, so she's not fully available to her daughter, but she can give her daughter her actual body. Like, I'm going to breastfeed my daughter way too long, perhaps, but this is going to be one way that the body can bring comfort, and the same way that, you know, sex brings a body comfort even when that body is grieving. So,
James, I have another question.
Sure, please.
What did it feel like Sunday when you were reviewed by the New York Times and reviewed really, really well? They liked it.
I love you for asking.
Well,
that
I
question.
want to know. I want to live vicariously.
What does that feel like?
Well, I will say that for Blacklight, which was very successful in many ways, it was not covered in the Times, and even after the National Book nomination, it still wasn't. And they said something like, "We've made our decision," which I was like, "That's fine." So I kind of had this feeling that the New York Times hates me. So I was very happy to see the review and to see that it was positive. But it's also written by Alyssa Nutting, who wrote Tampa, which maybe you've read it. One of the like ballsiest, bravest. It's sort of like a female Lolita, like it's like the Mary Kay Letourneau, essentially, like a version of that. And it takes such bravery to write the most despicable character, and I love and admire her for that. And I don't know her personally. You're not allowed to know the people who review at the Times, which is a good fact to know. But I'm so glad I hadn't met her in real life. But so to read that from a writer was really moving as well, not just necessarily like a staff reviewer, just because it's someone whose work I literally had looked at and would go and look at her Goodreads reviews, which are terrible because people are really mad at writing a character who is, a despicable character, and they are having a hard time separating fiction from a narrator from an author. So I looked to her quite a bit because some of the things that Kit does are a bit transgressive, and I needed strength and I needed boldness from a writer like her. So it was really bizarre, actually, to see that she had written it, because she's been on my mind for so many years as I've been writing it. So that was amazing. And then also just, there's nothing worse than being misunderstood. And the sense of being understood, like to know that you put something out there and that it was received in the appropriate way, is really moving. And that's the sort of thing also, like no matter what happens, like no one can take those reviews away. Like they exist forever. And so yeah, I felt really, really moved by it, but also just, I feel really moved by even bad reviews, honestly, just that someone takes the time to read and consider and then respond to your work, even when it's a bad review. Often the bad reviews are telling you what you're doing the best anyway. But I just remember for Blacklight, someone was like, "This book is full of bodily fluids," and I was like, "Oh yeah, like, I was like, yeah, we should put that on the cover." But they tell you what you're doing right. It's just that that's not right for them. But honestly, the fact that anyone in their own headspace is reading something that I wrote in my bedroom is bizarre and magical. So yeah, it felt great. But there are two moments that I sort of like burst into tears about this book. One was getting that blurb from Karen Russell, who another Florida writer who I adore, and to see that again, she was late with it, and I thought maybe she wasn't going to do it or something, or that she hated the book and was like just gonna never talk to me again. But to get that blurb from her and to feel again just so seen and to feel understood, like that's all you can ask for, really. So yeah. And I'm so happy that Bren saved copies of it for me, because I was out at the beach and now I have copies I can take home and frame, or what do you do? Put them in your scrapbook? I don't know.
Wait, was there another moment other than the Karen Russell?
Well, and then this,
okay.
yeah, and then
great.
reading the Times interview, which came on online. It actually came on Mother's Day, so I knew about it, but I was also thinking of how bad if you got a pan on Mother's Day, like what? And I'd be like mean mommy all day, but it was good. It was a good one. Yeah.
No, appropriate on Mother's Day. I mean, so much of the book is about motherhood,
Yeah.
And in some ways, similarly, how beautiful and wonderful it is, and how hard and difficult it is, and how many opinions mothers have about each other.
Yeah. It's that theater of parenthood, she says, like being on the playground. It's like you're, we were just talking about this before, like it's like you're saying a comment to your child, but it's really for the parents around you. So you're like, remember we are kind, and like, that's not for the kid, like that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I love it. What else are you thinking about out here?
I have a question.
Sure, right in the back.
Yeah, you mentioned about teaching. Where do you teach at?
So I'm teaching at Tin House is based in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and they are a really great program, and I'm teaching there in the fall, just a short session, but I teach mostly online with my friend Chelsea Beaker, and we have realized, I guess, during Zoom pandemic times that you can do these things yourself, and there's Venmo and there's Zoom, and so and we have Instagram, and so we have people who come and take our classes, and I actually really love working for myself, and so it's mostly there. So we have private classes that we give a few times a year, and then I work with writers one-on-one for manuscript consultations. So someone will just send a draft of a book, and then we really go through it. Like, that's the thing too, is like the feeling of being alone in a project is really, it's isolating and scary, and you just need somebody to get in there with you. And so I love being that person for writers. Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. It is fun.
Great question. Yes.
When you wrote this book, then is it more that they trusted you because of Blacklight, or did you have to pitch the idea, or is it more that they just said, let's have more?
They just said, I don't know why, but yeah, they just said, let's have more based on this thing. And I think that it's more appealing. So people don't read short stories is a thing that exists in the world. People just don't like them as much as novels in general. They don't sell as well. I've always loved the form, but I guess people like to spend more time with a character. And so whenever you have a deal, often they're trying to figure out how to angle for the novel as well. And so in my case, it worked reverse. Usually what happens is you have somebody who writes a novel, and then they're like, hey, we'll buy a 2-book, and do you have some short stories as well? And they'll put the short stories out second, but for me it was switched. But yeah, I don't really know. My acquiring editor is now selling real estate in Rhode Island. She's not even in publishing anymore. So maybe she just was, I don't know, but I'm really grateful for her every day.
It's all down there from Kimberly and Parsons, right? Like, out of the game. Fabulous. Before I keep asking questions, anything else? Any other ideas?
Yeah,
Sure.
So with what's next, are you going to be writing more short stories or another novel, or what's the plan?
So I actually think that in many ways writing a novel is easier for me, and it seems to be, it's easier for me to write, and it's easier for them to sell, and so I feel like that's the direction that I'm heading in, which is right now in that dumb phase again, where I'm just like writing sentence to sentence. I don't know what's happening exactly, but I'm really excited about what might happen. It's so full of possibility right now. And so I have been working on this. I actually started it at Hermitage last year, and I was gonna work on it more this time, but my kids are here with me, so a little bit harder. But I am, so it's a novel. It feels like a longer project. And I do think that there are some really cool benefits of staying with a character for a long time. And when you're writing a novel, you can do, this is like more teaching stuff, but something that I think of as an economy of imagination, meaning like I'm returning to the same 3 settings. Like it's the playground, it's the coffee shop, it's this pink rug where they take psychedelics, right? But those 3 locations become hotspots in the novel, and you can return to them, and so there's an accumulation. Like I've described it once on page 2, now on page 40, I don't have to describe it, I can describe it differently and add a new detail, and it just deepens the world of the book, and this is something that you can't do in a 14-page short story, and I love it, so it's been really fun.
Brilliant. Is there a project, or is there an idea out there that you're not quite ready for, or like on the list of like, one day I'm gonna write that kind of story, or like a thing about that? I'm curious if there's something on the bucket list like that.
I mean, everything I do is just really voice driven, and so I don't even like to think that far ahead. Like I really don't want to know anything. I want to know the least about the project. So I never have an idea. I tried this before. I wrote a really bad historical novel about an elephant trainer at turn of the century Coney Island, which is hilarious because this was me writing it in Texas as like a young person, having never been to New York. Don't really care much about elephants. Sorry for the elephants. They're great. Elephants are great. But like I don't know much about elephants. But I basically just had this idea, and somebody was like, I bet you could sell that. And I started to sort of bend the work to this idea in my head of the marketplace, which of course is impossible to predict, because is it going to be vampires next year? We don't know. No one knows. Publishers don't know. So I feel like the best thing that you can do is just try to write the book that only you can write, and meaning with your own precise mix of experience and your sort of like, if we're thinking of everybody here has their Texas motherhood and LSD, whatever those things are for you. And you know, maybe it's through things that are more seemingly connected, or maybe they're more disparate, but just this idea that you find the thing that only you can write about, and then you just write it like hell. Yeah.
I love it. So we've talked a little bit about family and keeping up a practice with the family. Are you like a regimented writer? You like get up in the morning and write for 2 hours whenever you're not on the beach?
I just have to do 1 hour, just 1 hour, and usually that hour will lead to more hours. But also, if I don't feel like writing, I immediately stop writing. So I make the time for the hour, but if I sit down and it's bad, then I leave the scene, because for me the worst thing is to sit there and feel bad about the work, and enthusiasm is the engine for all of it. So if it looks bad, then I'm like, I need to get out of here. I gotta go for a walk, I gotta go to a movie. I also am a big fan of like putting work in a drawer for like months. Like I put this book in a drawer. It took me 2 years to write it, but it was in a drawer for like a very long time, because I think that you get a lot of perspective. I think every book could benefit from being in a drawer for a year, honestly. Every work of art could probably benefit from being in a drawer for a year. But so I try to really listen to how I'm feeling. So I'm not gonna like bludgeon the work every day if it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Which sometimes looks like laziness from the outside. Or if you're like, but I really think that reading 12 books is better than me sitting there looking at my bad manuscript every day if I don't want to do it. But like I could go and read something beautiful or see a movie that's going to inspire me, or it's always in the back burner, you know? But I try to just do what feels good and try to like do gut instinct mostly.
Yeah.
James, I have another question.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm taking your job.
No, that's fine.
It occurs to me when you were talking, what about being at the Hermitage? Did that when you were really writing, when you didn't have your kids,
Yeah.
did that have any effect whatever on your thinking or your work, or how did it, or not?
Yeah, I mean, well, so that would be for this next project, right? And because this one was finished, but I had just found out about the change in the name actually, right? Like the day before I got here last year. And so I was still very like, what is this book? Who wrote it? Like, it was just very weird to have a title change like that. And things were like already in the pipeline in terms of my team, like they're talking about marketing stuff that's a year out. So it wasn't about this one, but about the new book. I do think it's about all I know about it so far is that it's a woman who's sort of a young woman who's recently sober, and she's a substitute teacher, and she's going back home to live with her dad in the Pacific Northwest. And there's something about being in a new space with all the new like lizards and snakes and new birds and like all of these things that make you hyper attuned to your body and your experience of the world. And so I certainly think that even though I was writing about a character in a very different location than Florida, the idea of being open to those things, like writing about a character entering the Pacific Northwest from Texas, of course, Texas, she is experiencing the Northwest in a way that I think was informed by my experience of being here. And that's the thing too, like, you know, in Oregon, actually quite a lot I'll meet people who really have not left. They're like, it's beautiful here, why would you leave? And I'm like, traveling is so important. Like, it's so important to just be in a different space, obviously to be around different people, but the sky is different. Like, literally the sky here, as you all know, lucky people, the sunsets here the clouds are not this color in other parts of the country. I think about like Mississippi too, like the light in Mississippi is actually different than the light in other places. And I think it's like all of those things certainly inform your work, because you are always entering the work as a stranger, trying to establish a sensation of a place, and you're always trying to bring a reader into that new space. So yeah.
Cool. All right, I have another process question.
Okay.
You told us a little bit about like the sound environment when you were working, but what about like what's on your desk? Right, you sit down, you're gonna write. Are there other books? Is there like a cup of tea? Like what's physically in your space whenever you sit down to work and feeling excited to do so?
Okay, so I'm a monster because I write in bed, like propped up on pillows, and I recently made the move. I have a work bed and a sleep bed. It's amazing. All I need now is like an eating bed. And like fully complete. But I love writing in bed because it's the most comfortable place for me. And so my partner thinks I'm insane. He's like, don't you feel like you're sick? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, no, this is great. I just love to like T-Rex a book on my laptop in bed. And so there's nothing on the bed. There's just, my cat is on the bed. And I have a really beautiful desk and like a whole wall of books in an office that I never go into. I mean, I go into there to read, but I just like to write in a place where I'm most comfortable. So yeah, the first thing I do is I wake up, I take my kids to school, and then I come home and I get back in bed. And then I'll leave. But I also walk a lot. Like walking has become a really big part of the writing process. Just getting an idea of, like you're thinking, like what's the ending? How am I gonna figure out how to end this? And just walking around with this idea of the ending in mind. And it's amazing how, in the same way that you would sort of set the scene for a trip where you're like, what am I gonna deal with on this trip? It's the same thing with a walk for writing. It's like, what am I gonna deal with? Like, I need to figure out this character, I need to figure out this bit of dialogue. And just having it in your brain, I think your brain is making a lot of connections even when your body is elsewhere.
Great. I'm realizing I haven't looked this way at all, so.
At your family.
I know. I'm trying not to be distracted. Well, I'll ask this one maybe. What out there in the literary world are you excited about right now? Like whose work do you admire? What's coming out that you're like, oh, I'm definitely gonna read that?
Yeah, so my best friend, Chelsea Beaker, she wrote a book called Godshot, which is wonderful. She has a novel called Madwoman that comes out September 3rd from Little Brown. It is a kind of a retelling of Sleeping with the Enemy, sort of, but like it's a domestic violence thriller, but it's very literary. It's about a woman who is sort of living a very healthy, wholesome Instagram life in Portland, Oregon, who has a secret past, and the past is sort of crashing into the present. It's both like really propulsive at the plot level, but also the sentences are gorgeous and it's really funny. So I'm really excited about that. There's so many books that I have bought that I want to read. I love Miranda July. All Fours is, I just started it. I have a Miranda July tattoo because I'm a ridiculous person. And that book is so good. It's about a woman going through menopause, essentially perimenopause, and just, yeah, it's all the things that you love about Miranda July. But yeah, I love those books. And there's a lot of books that I bought that I haven't read this year because in the year of your publication, it feels really, I don't know, it's very, like you don't have a lot of time to read. I'm so excited, actually. This is the sort of last thing that I'm doing, and then I go home for a while until book festivals in the fall. I have like a gap, and I can't wait to, there's so many books I want to read.
Yeah. I have another question, maybe process related. How do you give good feedback? It sounds like, you know, we talked a little bit about collaboration, we talked about writers' rooms, somebody that's like, I'm a dramaturg, I'm curious about this. How do you give somebody the thing that will help them without destroying them?
Yeah. Well,
or encourage them, or whatever the case may be. Like,
I think you're always just telling them, you're showing them what they're already doing. And so you, if whatever you're doing, you have your first line, and then are you refuting that first line, or are you like sinking deeper into that first line? And so it's just, you have to fulfill the promises that you're making as a writer. So your reader is expecting you to fulfill the promise or to swerve away from the promise, right? And so everything is just about careful consideration of what you've put down. And I think, like, for me, everything is at the line level. People talk about plot or about ideas or like these idea books, and there are some people who start from the top down. I say idea books, it's not a bad thing. I like these idea books. No, it's just that some people start from the top down, but I really think it has to go from the granular upwards, and that the sentences dictate what the story arc is. And so your writer, when you're reading somebody else's work, you're just looking to pay close and careful attention to what they're doing, and to make sure that, if you think of like beads on a necklace, are all of these beads, are they the same size bead? Are they different? And are they all really sequential? Are they working on the necklace how they should be working? I don't know.
there's some great metaphors in there. Thank you. Anything else before I maybe? Oh, we have a couple. Yeah, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick. Hello.
How do you know when something is done? What's your sense of completion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the answer is not as helpful as I wish it was, which is just gut, like just this sense of that's it, that's all. I often will come to the last line. For short stories, I think it's a little easier actually, because around like maybe it's the halfway point, maybe it's earlier, I will sometimes get the last line, and I know that's the very last line, and then it's about justifying that last line or meeting it, finding a way to get to it. And so with this novel, I knew the ending, and then I knew I was working towards that ending, and I had showed it to my editor, and he said, yeah, this is it, like that's the ending, but you're not like this middle, it's the middle that's the problem, like just trying to get to that point. But I think that the ending feels, in the same way that the first line feels kind of like a thunderbolt, like the ending always feels like that for me, where it just feels right, and you're like, I know this is it, and sometimes it then takes you years to figure out the middle, like how do you get there? But yeah, I think that it's, gut. Yeah.
Also, shame on me, I should have said, welcome to Patrick Harlan and Audrey Kelly, two fantastic other artists in residence down at the Hermitage Artist Retreat, composers. Follow their stuff. You can see Patrick's work on display right now at the Sarasota Art Museum. Go check it out. There was another question, yeah.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming here to Sarasota, and it's nice that the Hermitage brings you here. That's
Yes.
pretty cool that we do have a nice town that does things like
It
that.
is cool, yes.
Anyway, I was wondering, you've been here off and on for a couple of years now, and getting a little bit of what Sarasota has, and I was wondering if what kernel of Sarasota really strikes you, and if that kernel is going to get into a piece of work that you're going to be doing.
I mean, I hate to just keep talking about lizards all day, but I am like obsessed. They're so amazing, and I know that there are lizards in the Pacific Northwest, but there are just so many of them. Like, they're all different sizes, they're on different teams, like different brands of lizard. I don't know, I love them, and I love how just like little mini dinosaurs they are. I feel like there's something also about the sort of, when you're walking down a path. Also, I saw 3 mama turtles laying eggs, and it's amazing. It's so cool. Like, once in a lifetime kind of opportunity to see these things, and I'm sure that will come with me. And it's funny because I was getting sort of like emotional about these turtles laying eggs. They're like the least maternal animal ever, like dumping the eggs and leaving. But it's just magical to see that, and I think being around all of these animals, even though Kit doesn't really care about animals in this book, I actually do care quite a bit about animals, and I notice them, but walking down a path at night and hearing everything sort of skitter out of the way, that's not common. I don't know, like, it's such a magical thing, and I think that for all of you who live here, you're probably just like, oh, it's lizards, who cares? But for me, it's like amazing. Yeah, and the birds too, I don't know, just really, really cool animals, and that sort of like, yeah, just the lush heat of the place, it's like sexy. I don't know, it's nice.
Great question, thank you.
Yeah,
That was
thank
something
you.
that the Hermitage would get compared to a meaningful nature experience and ease as you read the book. That's fantastic. Well, before I wrap up with the last question, I want to thank you all here for coming, and just mention as we close that, Sandra, do you have a question? Please.
I'm a Dallas girl.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And the Texas mother food, it's
Sure.
like a Netflix.
Yeah.
Do relate. I wouldn't tell you to do that.
Yeah.
But no, I'm a little older, but I went to UT Austin.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So I left Dallas.
Went down to Austin.
And likewise, I left Texas, I'm gonna return.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting.
It's like a different country. I mean, Florida has a little bit of that swagger of Texas too. You know, there are certain states, there's some states that don't have that sort of defining personality about them, but it does feel like certain places really have a mythos around them. And I think Florida is one too. And you can see it also by the literature that comes out, whether it's Karen Russell or Alyssa Nutting or whoever, just work that's coming out from a space. But yeah.
And when you finally do leave,
Yeah.
you don't know this until you leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And people tell you things. Colorado was one of them.
Sure.
Yeah. No, for sure.
I think a lot of people probably have that experience about Texas and Florida and places like that. And then a
Yeah.
little bit of distance and absence, heart fonder, or something
For
like
sure.
that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you all for coming out and supporting programs like this. If you think this stuff is important as we do, our fiscal year ends on Sunday, and so we have a few more days for a dollar for dollar match of gifts to the Hermitage in this time. So if you're able to give, this is a wonderful time to do so. Just want to throw that out there so that our development department doesn't take my head off at the end of this program. So if you're able to give, that's wonderful. Last question. I love this one. when you're not creating brilliant works of literature, what's your cultural cotton candy? What's your pop culture? Like, how do you just turn it off and like,
Yeah.
what do you do?
I watch RuPaul's Drag Race a lot. Love it. I watch a lot of, so this is like kind of a literary TV show, but the Truman Capote, The Swans, The Feud, I don't know, it's so good. I watch a lot of movies. I watch a lot of horror movies, like not like slasher movies, but like ambient horror movies. And I love like, I don't know, like Midsummer, like something that's like very weird, which obviously that one makes more sense. There's like the psychedelic angle in that. But I love watching movies. I love going to movies in the daytime by myself. I also really love watching like MMA. I like boxing. Like
I did not see that one coming.
physical bodies in space, skilled bodies doing things. Like also like watching documentaries about like champions in various fields. Like I love seeing people like sort of reaching this like the edges of human capability in whatever form. But yeah, I do a lot of like daytime movies and a lot of which I guess, you know, depending on the movie can be like, you know, cotton candy or not, but yeah.
Well, would you join me in thanking Kimberly King Parsons for spending an hour with us? You got surveys on your way in. Do take a moment to fill those out. The book is available downstairs if you want to pick it up and learn more. And I think we could probably ask Kimberly to sign if you pick one up. So
for sure.
thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you so
We'll see you
much.
soon.
Thank you.